Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen and enjoy my stories every day. The light was fading outside as I sat by the kitchen table, staring at a single, small piece of paper, a receipt from a dinner I hadn't attended. It wasn't the first time I'd felt uneasy about my wife, Sarah, over the past few months. Small signs had popped up, hints I had brushed off with an uneasy laugh, telling myself I was being paranoid. But now, with this slip of paper in my hand, something clicked. Nate was the name on the reservation. Just Nate. It was no work dinner, no business meeting. This was personal. The memory of her face as she left that night flashed through my mind. She had looked radiant, in a dress I hadn't seen in years. "It's a work thing, just the usual crowd," she'd explained, brushing her hair back and avoiding my eyes. I wanted to believe her. After 15 years, you want to believe in the person you've built your life with. But there was something guarded in her gaze that night, a flicker of a secret she kept just out of my reach. I hadn't thought much of it then, I'd been preoccupied with work, the renovations on the house, and juggling time with our kids. But this receipt brought everything into sharp, undeniable focus. I sat there for a while, processing the reality of it. I'd heard stories about this, sure. Friends who'd gone through infidelity, whispered confessions over drinks in dimly lit bars. But it was different when it was your life being torn apart. My stomach churned, yet I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to rush into an accusation without knowing the full picture. I'd seen too many people do that and end up with nothing but regret. I needed more, proof that even she couldn't deny. The next morning, before Sarah was awake, I installed a tracking app on her phone. I'd done enough research to find something discreet, a tool designed to look like another, innocent app. It would give me locations, timestamps, all the data I'd need without her ever suspecting a thing. The guilt I felt about crossing that boundary was brief, it evaporated as I remembered the way she had laughed the night before, a laugh she hadn't shared with me in years. Over the next few weeks, my life shifted into this strange, dual existence. By day, I was her husband, the same man I'd always been. I kept things normal, making breakfast for the kids, handling the day-to-day routine. But beneath that, I was someone else entirely. I was a man on a mission, tracking my own wife, digging into her life with a mix of dread and morbid curiosity. I found myself praying that I was wrong, that I was chasing shadows. But deep down, a part of me knew. It wasn't long before my suspicions were confirmed. Her work trips on weekends were not what she claimed. The locations from the tracking app showed her in places no work function would ever be. Hotel addresses cropped up repeatedly. It wasn't even subtle. She'd leave early Friday, claiming an early morning conference start, and return late Sunday, flushed and invigorated as though she'd been on some adventure. She'd tell me little anecdotes about colleagues I'd never met, long presentations, all the usual. But I knew the truth now. And once I knew, I found myself disgusted, yet fascinated. The person I had known, or thought I'd known, had unraveled before me. One weekend, she came back from one of her so-called work trips, bags in hand, carrying the faint scent of some cologne that wasn't mine. She brushed past me with a casual, "Hey, honey," and set her things down before hugging the kids. I studied her, wondering how she could slip so easily back into the life we had built together. Did she feel no guilt? No trace of the betrayal I felt growing in my chest each day? The thought hardened me. I wasn't going to be a passive bystander in my own life. I started planning my next move. I knew this wasn't something I could handle with a simple confrontation. I'd heard stories of explosive fights, of one partner raging and the other denying everything, twisting the truth until the hurt went silent. No, I wasn't going to give her that power. I wanted her to feel the weight of her decisions. I wanted her to understand that what she had torn apart could never be patched back together with hollow apologies. One evening, while scrolling through my phone, an idea sparked. A remote cabin, tucked away in the mountains, a place to reconnect. I'd seen an ad for it on some travel site, promising a secluded escape. Perfect for two people. I could make it seem like a romantic getaway, a chance to spend time together and heal the fractures she had unknowingly created. She'd never suspect it was a setup. I booked the cabin and told her it was a prize I had won at work, an unexpected perk of some raffle I hadn't told her about. Her eyes lit up when I mentioned it. She saw this as a gift, a break from her tangled double life. She agreed with no hesitation, her voice bright with enthusiasm. It almost made me laugh, how easily she accepted it, how simple it was to convince her to come along. As I prepared for the trip, I went to the cabin a few days early to make some adjustments. I reinforced the locks on the door, making sure it could only be opened from the outside. I stocked the place with enough food and water to last her a while. She wasn't going to starve, after all. My intention wasn't to harm her physically. This was about making her confront the reality she had tried so hard to hide, trapping her with the consequences of her choices. On the day we left, I could barely contain my anticipation. The drive up the mountain was quiet, and she was lost in thought, probably imagining the weekend would bring us closer, allowing her to erase her guilt temporarily. When we arrived, she gasped at the view, a spectacular panorama of forested mountains stretching out before us. She turned to me, eyes wide with wonder, and gave me a soft kiss. For a brief second, the part of me that had once loved her, that had once trusted her unconditionally, stirred. But I pushed it down. That version of myself had been destroyed by her betrayal, leaving only the determination to see this through. We settled in, unpacking and getting comfortable. I let her relax, play the role of the loving wife she pretended to be, while my mind remained fixed on what was to come. The first evening passed almost peacefully, with an air of tranquility that felt alien in the light of what I knew. I watched Sarah move through the cabin, smiling as she cooked us a simple meal on the small stovetop. It was surreal, seeing her act so at ease, as if there was nothing out of place. Her laugh, her gestures, the way she tossed her hair, all of it seemed like it belonged to another life. I stayed quiet, responding minimally, letting her think this was just another weekend, another ordinary moment. As we sat down to eat, she started talking about our future, as if she wanted to rekindle a spark. "You know, I've been thinking about us a lot lately," she began, her voice soft. I watched her, barely blinking, waiting to hear what lie she'd try to feed me next. "Maybe we could take more weekends like this," she went on, her gaze meeting mine with a sincerity I might have once believed. "It's been so long since we really connected, don't you think?" I fought back the bitterness that was rising in my throat. She talked about connection while she had been making one with someone else. My fingers tightened around my fork as I forced a smile, nodding along with her monologue about our bond. She thought she could play me so effortlessly, assuming I would accept whatever crumbs she offered without question. The irony was suffocating. The next day, we went on a hike along one of the nearby trails, walking in silence under the vast, blue sky. Sarah kept glancing at me, as though expecting some great confession of love, something she could hold on to. But I stayed silent, my mind churning with every memory I had of her infidelity, the secrets she'd kept, the nights she'd spent in another man's arms while I'd been none the wiser. I caught her looking at me again, her brows furrowing. "Are you all right?" she asked, reaching out to touch my arm. The audacity made my skin crawl. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, pulling my arm back as naturally as I could. "Just thinking." She didn't press the issue, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes, a flicker of concern that, for once, might be genuine. It almost felt like she was starting to sense that something was wrong, something she couldn't name. Good. Let her feel a fraction of the tension that had been tearing me apart since I first found out. That night, back at the cabin, I set the plan into motion. I kept my expression neutral as we ate dinner, listening to her tell stories about her office, recounting events with the sort of easy charm that used to captivate me. But all I saw now was a stranger, a woman who could lie with ease, weave tales that I could no longer find any comfort in. After dinner, I suggested she get comfortable in the bedroom. "Why don't you go ahead?" I said, giving her a reassuring smile. "I'll clean up here and then join you." She hesitated, her gaze flickering over me, and I wondered if she was finally starting to suspect something. But, in the end, she smiled and nodded, heading off to the bedroom, no doubt feeling the allure of a romantic night. I waited until I heard the soft click of the bedroom door, then moved quickly. I gathered her phone, her purse, her keys, every means of communication she might have had. I pocketed them, then grabbed the small note I had written earlier, a single line that she would find in the morning. It was simple. Asterisk, sometimes we have to face what we've been running from. Asterisk. Then, I stepped outside, locking the door firmly behind me. I stood there for a moment, taking in the quiet of the forest, the sound of distant wind through the trees. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't from fear or guilt. It was from something else, a sense of finality, of knowing that I was in control of this situation. I walked around the cabin one last time, checking each window and door, ensuring that there was no way she could leave without me letting her out. The sky was darkening by the time I made my way to the car. I sat there, taking a moment to catch my breath. My thoughts drifted back to everything I'd found over the past few weeks. The hotel stays, the text messages, the whispered calls in the late hours of the night. The image of her laughing with someone else, her smile bright and easy, the way she used to smile at me. A dull ache settled in my chest, but I pushed it away. That part of my life was over. I had given her everything, and she had taken it, torn it apart without hesitation. When I drove away, the cabin faded into the shadows behind me, hidden among the trees and mist. I felt an odd mix of relief and dread. She would wake up the next morning, confused, maybe even frightened, but it was nothing compared to what she had put me through. This wasn't about vengeance, not really. It was about making her confront the weight of her choices, making her see that there were consequences. The drive back to the city was quiet, and the roads were empty. I glanced at the empty seat beside me, feeling a strange sense of clarity. I wasn't the man I had been a few months ago. That man, the husband who had trusted so easily, was gone. What remained was someone stronger, someone who could walk away without looking back. The next day, I received a text from her, just a single message asking if I was all right, if something had happened. I didn't respond. I knew that soon, panic would set in. She would realize that I wasn't coming back to the cabin. She would be forced to stay there, alone with her thoughts, with the reality of what she'd done to our life. I almost wished I could see her face when the truth hit her. Days passed, and I ignored every message, every voicemail she left. Friends and family reached out, asking if we were all right, if they should be worried. I kept things vague, telling them I was handling things, that I just needed some time alone. My life settled into a strange routine, one where I was no longer tethered to her lies, where I could breathe without the constant weight of suspicion and betrayal. It was a week later that I finally decided to return. The days passed slowly, each one feeling longer than the last. Every so often, my phone would light up with a new message or voicemail from Sarah, each one more frantic than the last. Her messages began politely, like she was still under the illusion that I'd come back. "Hey, are you okay? This isn't funny anymore, you know. Just come back, let's talk." I ignored each one, watching her desperation build, her pleas turning into frantic calls for me to explain what was going on. I could practically hear her voice, each text echoing the panic that had probably overtaken her by now. The little note I'd left, the one telling her to face what she'd been running from, must have sunk in. I imagined her finding it in the morning, maybe laughing it off at first, expecting it was some weird joke. Then realizing I was gone, that her phone, purse, and keys were missing, that the doors and windows were locked from the outside. And in that silence, she would have no choice but to confront the truth. I stayed away longer than I'd originally planned, letting her stewing worry reach its peak. I wanted to give her plenty of time alone with her thoughts, forcing her to reflect on what she'd done. I could imagine her pacing the small cabin, her eyes darting to the windows, maybe thinking about the last conversations we'd had, wondering if I'd somehow known. And the truth was, I wanted her to feel that fear, to taste the dread I'd swallowed every day since I'd found that receipt. After a week, I drove back to the cabin. The trip felt different this time, calmer, more resolute. I wasn't returning to her out of love, but to close a chapter of my life that had been slowly poisoning me from the inside. My mind drifted back to the image of her face when she had kissed me goodbye before one of her trips. How easily she'd lied, the ease with which she had maintained her double life, assuming I'd never find out. It felt unreal. When I finally pulled up to the cabin, I cut the engine and took a deep breath, letting the silence settle around me. I could see her through the cabin's front window, moving around in a slow, restless pattern. She looked weary, her shoulders hunched, her hair disheveled. She must have heard the sound of my car pulling up because she froze, her head snapping up toward the window. Her face broke into a mixture of relief and anger, and I could feel the storm that was about to hit. I walked to the door, unlocking it with a deliberate slowness. She was on the other side, waiting, her eyes wide and blazing. "What the hell, James?" she hissed, her voice raw. "What kind of game are you playing?" I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. She stood in the middle of the room, arms crossed, eyes red from what I assumed were sleepless nights. For a moment, I just looked at her, taking in the image of the woman I'd once trusted with everything. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, the confident woman I'd known replaced by someone anxious, desperate for answers. "I think the question, Sarah, is what kind of game you were playing," I replied, my voice steady. Her face paled, and she took a step back, her expression shifting. She tried to recover, to summon the calm, dismissive demeanor she'd used on me for so long. But I could see the cracks, the faint tremor in her hands. She didn't know how much I knew, and that uncertainty gave me the control I'd been longing for. "Stop with the cryptic crap, James," she spat, her voice trembling. "You locked me in here, took my phone, my keys, everything. What are you trying to do?" I tilted my head, letting her words sink into the silence that hung between us. "I think it's time you started telling me the truth, Sarah. About the work trips, the weekends away." I took a step closer, watching her closely. "About Nate." Her mouth opened slightly, the shock evident on her face. I could tell she hadn't expected me to come out with it so directly, that she thought she could still dance around the truth. I watched as she struggled to pull herself together, her expression twisting as she tried to regain control. "There's nothing to tell," she said, her voice shaky, but she couldn't meet my eyes. "You're being paranoid. I told you it was just work." "Work doesn't leave reservation receipts at romantic dinners," I interrupted, the words sharper than I intended. "I found it, Sarah. I found the receipt. And I've seen the messages. The hotels." Her face fell, her hands dropping limply to her sides as the strength she had been clinging to drained away. For a long moment, she was silent, staring at the floor, her defenses crumbling piece by piece. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, defeated. "So, you knew?" I gave a slight nod, keeping my expression neutral. "I knew. For a while now." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "And this is how you decided to handle it? By locking me up here, treating me like a prisoner?" I felt a surge of anger rise up, a reminder of everything she had put me through. "You have no idea what you put me through, Sarah. Every lie, every excuse, it's like you thought I was too stupid to see it, like I'd just accept everything you said." She looked away, her face shadowed with guilt, her voice barely a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you." The words rang hollow, and I couldn't help but laugh, a harsh, bitter sound. "Well, congratulations, because you did. More than you can imagine." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of pity, a sliver of the old affection I'd once held for her. But it was fleeting, quickly replaced by the hurt and anger she had buried me under. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice thick with tears, her expression pleading. I took a step back, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "That's up to you," I replied, my voice steady. "You can keep running from the truth, pretending you were justified, or you can own up to what you did. Either way, I'm done with the lies." She stared at me, her mouth opening as if to protest, but she stopped herself, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I waited, letting the silence stretch out, hoping she'd finally acknowledge her actions, confront the reality she tried to bury. After a long moment, she nodded slowly, a single tear tracing down her cheek. "I'm sorry, James. I messed up, and I know that. I never thought it would come to this." She paused, wiping her eyes, her gaze finally meeting mine. "I don't expect you to forgive me. But I do want you to know that. I didn't want to lose you." Her words hung in the air, a fragile attempt at redemption. I felt a strange mixture of emotions, a hollow sadness, a sense of closure, and, maybe, a touch of relief. I had wanted to hear her say it, to admit to the wrongs she had committed. But now that I had, it felt empty, a ghost of the love we once shared. "I'm leaving, Sarah," I said finally, the words steady, calm. "When we get back, I'm filing for divorce. I think that's best for both of us." She nodded, her face a mask of sorrow and acceptance. "I understand." I turned toward the door, feeling a weight lift from my chest as I took a final glance around the cabin that had become a prison for both of us. Without another word, I walked out, leaving her standing alone in the quiet, empty room. As I drove away, a strange sense of peace settled over me. The life I had known was over, but in its place was something new, something free of lies and deceit. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The sun was beginning to set as I drove back to the city, the horizon painted in muted hues of orange and pink. The scene felt almost peaceful, as if the world itself were offering me a kind of closure. I thought about what I'd just left behind, the cabin, the confrontation, and Sarah's broken expression. She had finally admitted to her betrayal, to the lies she'd woven between us. And while her apology hadn't healed everything, it had given me the permission I needed to let go. I was ready to rebuild, to find my footing again. But the sadness lingered, a bittersweet reminder of the life we had once shared, now shattered. I was halfway home when my phone buzzed in the seat beside me. The screen lit up with a text from Sarah. Against my better judgment, I picked it up, glancing at the message, curious to see what she might have left to say. "James, please call me. I need you to understand something important. Please. I don't want it to end this way. I hesitated, her words filling me with a strange, uneasy feeling. Her tone was desperate, pleading in a way that was different from before. I considered ignoring it, sticking to my decision to let the past be the past. But something about her message tugged at me, an invisible thread winding around my resolve. With a sigh, I pulled over to the side of the road, resting my head back against the seat as I contemplated my next move. My finger hovered over the call button, reluctant but curious. A minute passed. And then, I gave in. The phone rang only once before she picked up, her voice trembling on the other end. "James?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "I got your message." "What is it, Sarah?" There was a pause, and then a shaky breath. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything," she began, her words strained, barely holding together. "But I need you to hear this. Please, just, give me one more chance to explain." I clenched my jaw, irritation flaring up again. "Explain? Sarah, you've done enough explaining. You cheated, you lied, you manipulated. I think that says it all." "No, James, it's not that simple, she said, her voice cracking. It's never been that simple. You don't know the whole story. Then tell me, I snapped, more harshly than I'd intended. Tell me what I missed while you were off with someone else. She was silent for a moment, her breathing the only sound on the line. It started a long time ago, after the miscarriage, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I lost myself, James. I felt empty, like nothing mattered anymore. You were always so strong, so capable, and I thought I'd lost you to your work, to your life. I felt so alone. Nate, he made me feel like I existed again. Her words hit me like a blow to the chest, reigniting memories I had tried to bury. The miscarriage had been a silent wound between us, something neither of us had known how to address. We'd tried to move on, pretending we were fine, hoping time would heal the ache. But now, as she spoke, I realized how deeply it had affected her, how isolated she must have felt. You should have told me, I whispered, the anger slipping away, replaced by a hollow sadness. Why didn't you just tell me, Sarah? I didn't know how, she choked out. I didn't want you to see how broken I was. You always held it together, and I didn't. I didn't know how to talk to you. And by the time I realized what I'd done, it was too late. I was too far gone, too ashamed. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her confession settle over me. It didn't erase the betrayal, didn't make the pain go away, but it made it complicated. There was no easy villain, no clean break between us. We were both lost, both tangled in a mess of our own making. James, I know I can't undo the damage I have caused. But I needed you to know. I needed you to understand why. For a long time, we sat in silence, the truth hanging between us like a fragile thread. I didn't know what to say, didn't know if there was anything left to say. I could feel the sorrow pooling in my chest, a grief for the life we'd shared, for the family we'd almost had, for the love that had once bound us. Goodbye, Sarah, I said softly, feeling the words catch in my throat. I hope you find peace. The line went quiet, her soft breath fading into nothing as I ended the call. I sat there, staring at the darkening sky, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on me. I wanted to feel free, to walk away without looking back, but I knew it wasn't that simple. Love didn't fade away with a single phone call, a single goodbye. It lingered, clinging to the edges of my heart, a shadow I would carry with me,